close, but not so close. Quarantine. You can share from a distance. Quarantine. You know we want to see each other. You'll have to stay in your quarantine space while we talk.
This is episode 50, Quarantine. It's kind of like our big birthday. And what we're celebrating somehow is the crossroad of a crisis, an opportunity of human response, and of an unexpected biological situation. Who would have thought when we started this thing in March? And we started Quarantine in March, both because we saw a lot of innovation going on and we were lonely. So we wanted to bring our friends together and talk. That we would be at this moment going into the fall at the start of the third wave of this. Today's show is a very hopeful one because we're going to take on this biological century when we have these powerful tools to build, to create, and to author. And we're going to take a look at this both because we'll be joining the Transformational Technology Conference with Nicole Bradford, who has been with us before, and with Jane Metcalf, who's created Neolife, which is a very forward-looking media property that's helping us enter this century. Our co-host, as always, is Mickey McManus.
Hey, Peter.
Okay, happy birthday. We're at 50.
50. I don't think that's, I'm not sure if we're happy or sad that we're still, we started this time capsule in March, and it was the week we all went on shelter in place. And to believe that we would create 50 of anything together, Peter, is just wrong in so many ways in my brain. But in some way, it is interesting. I think what's happening, and I'm super excited about the guest that we have today. But I think if we step back, maybe the reason when we talked about what to talk about today, one, Nicole Bradford hosts this amazing transformational tech conference, and it's going on today and tomorrow. So we're going to actually end our discussion today by tuning in with Nicole and hearing about how the first day went. Well, she's been really focused on the inner landscape, sort of our mind, and how are we coping with meaning? How are we coping with stress? How are we coping with loneliness? And what are some new transformational tools that can help us with that? And Jane is sort of legendary, and I'm super excited about what she's going to be talking about. But in the moment that this positive stuff is going on, where we're all trying to find new ways of working, and we're also looking at how to unlock this sort of biological century in a good way, the other side of the coin is that, Ed Young today in The Atlantic had an article that, here, I don't know if you can put this up, Peter, but the Atlantic article was called, basically, the third surge is breaking healthcare workers. Like we are not prepared as a country or as a planet for the never-ending surge if we don't get things out of things in control. Actually, so Peter, you just pulled up.
I pulled up the whiteboard and not a screen. Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the whiteboard?
Yeah, actually, I'll tell you about this. So yeah, this is the whiteboard we've been using to track every single episode of Quarantine. And what's kind of interesting, last week we had a conversation about forgiveness and higher ground and what to do after the election. But each episode has been kind of an interesting exploration of a different part. And when I was pulling back earlier today, I noticed that, Nicole Bradford and Poppy Crumb were on an episode. If we go far back into the first season, I guess this is season 3, really. We don't know what even seasons are. But I looked at episode 12. So let's zoom in on episode 12. Sorry for the madcap run through this. And you can see Nicole Bradford was talking back in the end of April. And she was talking about this notion that we're on a spectrum from, the sense of self-doubt and hopelessness at one end, and the mental and emotional stuff to social learning, to new ways of doing things, all the way out to the end of human potential and performance. And I think that that was kind of a beautiful way of saying it. But she also was pointing out that access to these technologies, often only the elites, only the CEOs get access to like coaching and therapy and you know, like tuning of their high performance. And her dream is to sort of, how could we make that so that it's accessible to all? And I thought that was wonderful. And then a little earlier today, I noticed that our next guest, Jane, was interviewing Poppy Crum from Dolby, and she had visited us that same episode. And the thing I drew from that, which I thought was interesting, and I want to touch base with Jane about kind of her conversation just now. But one thing that Poppy said is humans change when the story you tell yourself about yourself changes. And I just thought that was powerful. And I think at this moment, we are all in a liminal moment. We're in this moment of becoming and trying to figure out what is the story we're telling about ourselves in lockdown, but also in this next century. And I think having our first guest on would be a great way to start this, because Jane has been a historian, a futurist, a chronicler of the last century, and I think this next century as well. Jane, thank you for joining us. This is super exciting to have you today.
Thank you, Mickey. It's lovely to see you since the pandemic prevented us from having dinner. And Peter, it's always lovely to see you.
The last time I saw you live was at the Kickstarter launch at the Gray Area for Neolife, which was sort of the glorious moment before everybody locked down.
It really, you know, that really was. That was the end of view exhibit at Gray Area. Was your launch in February or March when you had the?
It was January. That was actually during the JP Morgan Health Conference, and everybody now refers to the events that we do during that conference as like the coolest party during JP Morgan, which of course is not happening this year.
Why don't you tell us about Neolife? And you know, as background, you of course in the 90s created Wired, that led us through the exploration of the information technology revolution, and you've come back with Neolife. Kind of tell us what inspired it, what it is, and what to expect.
So I never imagined, being involved in science since I was a little girl, and realized I don't have that kind of singular focus, that it would allow you to succeed as a scientist. But I never stopped being a science groupie. And, during the Wired era, I realized, engineering is cool, but I really like science. And I spent some time at a chocolate factory, actually. This was a startup investment we made. And then I eventually got involved as president of the company. And building a chocolate factory and making chocolate was, first of all, on the waterfront in San Francisco. How could you ever experience stress running a company like that? But secondly, it got me thinking about food as medicine, the health benefits of chocolate. It's based on cacao has this like remarkable molecule called theobromine, which has all kinds of health benefits, health and wellness benefits. And so that got me thinking about those things. And then dealing with 3 octogenarians, also known as my parents, and dealing with their mental illness and their cognitive decline. And so I started looking for things, technologies, discoveries, drugs, treatments, anything that could help my parents. And that took me to the leading edge of neuroscience, which, is really kind of my happy place. As a publisher, understanding, how people absorb information and how to best impart information and how we learn and neuroplasticity. I mean, I could spend literally all day thinking about that stuff. But then a friend, Ryan Phelan, who's been an entrepreneur in the space of personal genomics for decades now, which is quite an extraordinary thing to be able to say about anyone, having been a pioneer in personal genomics for decades. Like, just run that.
Yeah, she was there really early.
Really early, long before 23andMe. And she said, the brain stuff's really interesting, and you got to check out what's happening now that we've sequenced the human genome. And it was right around that same time that, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier published their paper about CRISPR. And so, at that point,
they just won a Nobel Prize like
how
2 weeks
cool
ago,
is that?
right? I mean, that's awesome.
2 women winning a
yeah.
Nobel Prize for chemistry, it's like, yes, groundbreaking, absolutely extraordinary. And of course, that's the right, and they actually could have not won for several reasons. One, not the least of which is this patent battle that they've got going on with the Broad Institute and Fang Zhang, who was the first to demonstrate it in animal. I forget exactly what their patent dispute is. I should have boned up on that. But it's an ongoing battle between those 2 institutions. And so, he could arguably have deserved a Nobel Prize for his work. George Church could arguably, Craig Ventnor. These people have been involved with this stuff. But apparently the Nobel Committee will not award a prize to more than 3 people. And because there are more than 3 people, who've been involved with the development of CRISPR, I was worried that this would be an excuse to not give it to Jennifer and Emmanuel. So I was particularly happy to see that they kind of just went, no, we're going to go with the first people who really demonstrated how to harness this, bacterial process to edit our DNA. So I think that was a big win. But
and so Ryan pointed you to sort of what was happening in the CRISPR side of things and all the churn there. And so you've got the neuroscience, you've got the, sort of all this stuff, food as medicine. Then what happened?
So then I went to a conference. And, I'm all about people, and people, science and technology don't happen without people. And so a friend of mine, Daniel Kraft, had been trying to get me to come to his Future of Medicine conference for a long time. And I'm looking at him, it's like, I am not an MD, I'm not a PhD, it's like, why are you inviting me? Why do you think this would be good for me or that I could contribute? And anyway, at this point, with my 3 octogenarians, I was desperate for any insight. And so I went. And I'm standing there telling a geneticist things about neuroscience and telling a neuroscientist things about the microbiome and food as medicine. And, I was going to lurk in the corner. And instead, I became somebody that people were like, oh, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way. Or I didn't know that. So
you were doing this cross-fertilization and interdisciplinary or anti-disciplinary kind of connections. Which actually, I think the book, and hopefully we can talk about that a little bit, is just a beautiful tour de force. I mean, it's a beautiful object, first of all, and it's a beautiful tour de force of this kind of blending across so many different disciplines that it gives you this rich feeling. And so you found yourself doing that.
And thank you for your support on my Kickstarter campaign.
Hey, Jane, did you find in this silo busting moment, because there are such deep areas of medical science that you were kind of looking across, did you find that there were deeper silos and therefore a greater need to silo bust in this or in your wired world? Or in the wired world, we're kind of like IT tech people all kind of more aware of each other?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, I was shocked by the silos. And, I have to say that during the wired era, although I was meeting a lot of academics and PhDs and so forth, I was mostly meeting entrepreneurs, right? And people who were saying, I can solve this problem by developing this technology, which, maybe they were siloed, but it was always plugging into the network, that was being built. And, they needed the tools that were popping up all over the place, and they were taking examples wherever they could find it, and employing that to build their software or hardware, as the case may be. Whereas I remember having this conversation with Christina Agapakis, who is a molecular biologist and an artist, which is a really lovely combination.
She's at Ginkgo, right?
She's a creative director at Ginkgo Bioworks. Which is also kind of an extraordinary job title. Ginkgo being at the forefront of synthetic biology and pioneering new flavors and fragrances, and of course now vaccines. But she was telling me how, she just couldn't bear the thought of going deeper and deeper and deeper into her field, which is what happens to scientists. And they become experts by going deeper and deeper. And the only way to do that is to block out everything else and then zero in until you become the world expert on the most esoteric thing there is. And she just didn't want to do that. And, I remember also, I was at UC
I've heard
Davis.
it referred to as being, sort of spelunking. You're going deeper and deeper inside of a cavern instead of climbing a mountain to see across to another mountain. And this is what
Exactly.
a lot of people in the disciplines are very nervous of. I was actually looking for
Oh, yes.
Christina's article in Neolife. I just wanted everyone to have a sense of this, just the beautiful, the book itself. And of course, there's a whole community behind this, but tell us the story about what you talk about in the book with Christina. I think it's
Amazing.
stunning. Yeah.
Amazing. So, first of all, Ginkgo was founded by really the grandfather of, or fathers, I should say, of synthetic biology, which is Tom Knight, and Jason was there. And I'm not going to get all the names of the founders. I believe there's 4 of them. There's a woman who I've never met, who I think sounds extraordinary. And they were doing this basically completely different type of engineering, that involved the wet stuff. And so they, spun out and raised some money and said, okay, what are we going to do? And, I think when you're pioneering a new business, there's a lot of, blue sky brainstorming sessions and stuff. When you're pioneering a whole new discipline in science and launching a new business, there must be 10 times as many of those kind of sitting around a conference room, thinking about what you can do with these tools. And it was a conversation with, I know Jason and Christina were there. I'm sure there were others from Ginkgo who were there. And somebody posited the question, what would an extinct flower smell like? Oh. And that became the genesis of this project, which Christina shepherded through these multiple stages of development, starting with, okay, let's get a list of extinct flowers. So she went to the herbarium at Harvard and had a list of extinct plants and flowers and matched it with the plant samples that they had at the herbarium, and actually found, I forget how many, 8 or 11 or some not huge number that were on her list, including one, by the way, from my hometown, which I think is kind of cool. And which, of course, we had to mention in the story. Then she went to the paleogenomics lab at UC Santa Cruz, right? Who knew there was a paleogenomics lab?
Yeah. I'm learning new words today. That's good.
Right, exactly. And so they extracted the DNA, and then I guess Ginkgo sequenced it. I forget who actually sequenced it. And they found the sequence that encodes proteins to generate certain enzymes. And then those enzymes, of course, would have certain flavor profiles. So they took those flavor profiles, or the proteins, let's say, to this fabulous woman who I actually happen to know from a completely different walk of life. One of my very best friends lives in Berlin and had befriended this woman named Sissel Tolas. And Sissel is a PhD chemist from Oxford and living in Berlin. And she runs a scent lab where she does all sorts of really interesting things for like Fortune 1000 companies having to do with scent. But she's an artist. And so she and Christina collaborated on creating the scents based on the DNA and based on the proteins that the DNA would code for. And I don't know how they came up with the particular percentages of, this molecule versus that and so forth. That's I think it's a combination of science and art. But then they came up with these fragrances that could be justified as having come from these plants. And then they turned to Alexandra Daisy Ginsburg, who is another incredible powerhouse in art, another woman artist whose work is about how technology is transforming us. She's done some extraordinarily beautiful and eerie kinds of work. She's not locked into a particular medium. And so she's done video and she's done live performance and she's done acoustical work and things like that. And so anyway, she actually took the idea and the scent and actually staged it for the Milano Biennale. And then it traveled and it went to the Pompidou Center in Paris It was shown in Saint-Étienne, also in France, and I don't know where else it's been. But it's just
But I
one of
think the story has this fascinating, it's almost like detective story, archaeology story, connection story, and it scans across. You know, I remember seeing Tom Knight launch the iGEM competition this year, which you've got Megan Palmer in here talking about what happens when high school kids can actually boot up things and what are the ethics and the situations. And Tom kicked off the iGEM competition this year, and he said, look, he was a software scientist, a computer scientist, until he was after 50 years old, you know, and then got excited by biology, and now finds himself, you know, to be one of the founders of one of the biggest unicorns in synthetic biology space. Can you pull us back?
Yeah, Jane, you just
go ahead.
one of what, 25 stories.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering what the taxonomy is of this new world that you're covering. This biological century, you've collected 25 stories, and they probably hook up and give us an arc and a taxonomy of what's going on. So maybe you could.
Thank you for asking that question. It takes a media geek to ask about taxonomy. And I got to tell you, it's been an issue that I have struggled with since the day I launched Neolife. And, you know, the question is, how do you thread the needle, and how do you thread all of these different things together and into one coherent and cohesive picture? When people who are interested in genetics are going to Google genetics, and people who want to know about, you know, art and technology are going to be looking someplace else. And how do you make it make sense, you know, on a website or in a book? And, you know, I want to say, Peter, that, you know, Brian and I sat down and thought it through, and, you know, it was a stroke of genius that, you know, led us to then commission the stories based on our thesis. And, you know, that's really not what happened at all. I mean, the editorial process on this book was far more, what's the word, serendipitous. If you will. And it wasn't, to be perfectly honest, it wasn't until all the stories were in. And my dear friend, Jennifer Morla, who's a fabulous graphic designer and graphic artist, said, so what are the chapters here? And what's the table of contents look like? It's like, oh yeah, we better come up with a taxonomy. And
well, and I think it's worth, just for the viewers here, you know, it's a beautiful kind of lush photographic. Each story might be only 2 or 3 pages long, but it's just beautifully put together. But if you are interested and you're thinking, okay, I want to understand more about this, Jane, you have a whole community, a continuing ongoing conversation here, and it's all at neo.life. Is that correct?
www.neo.life, because .life is a domain name. And that's just so much cooler than .com.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Right?
Jane,
I just want to answer your question.
You were about to do the big reveal of how this fits together, the story.
Right, the taxonomy question.
And our 21st century taxonomy.
But yes, the book was actually the result of a series of conversations that took place in the fall of 2018 now. And I realized that I was meeting all these extraordinary scientists whose work was going to transform our species within our lifetimes. And that was a gobsmacking, you know, kind of moment. And as I want to do, I think, well, so how's that going to affect me, right? And what are future humans going to look like? And of course, it's a topic I've been thinking about my whole life, you know. But now I was actually meeting the people who had the tools to do it. And so I said, you know, what's the future of our species? And if you had to design it, which you kind of are, you know, what if we brought design thinking to this process, and what would it look like? And so anyway, we had a series of fabulous dinner parties, and at the end of which I realized we need to do a workshop. You know, we need to actually workshop this idea. So I think actually that idea was Hannu Rajaniemi's. Hannu is a pioneer.
Science fiction, crazy author, and also has a synthetic. He is Helix Nano, I think, right? So it's a synthetic biology startup.
Exactly.
By the way, I'd like to say,
so I love this idea of bringing design thinking to this kind of shape of. Now that it kind of goes back to Stuart Brand's, we might as well get good at it kind of thing. You know, we are as gods kind of thing. But I love the idea of design thinking, when it works best, is more humble about understanding need knowers. The people who really know the needs.
You might
And
add
you
to
just
this,
said it yourself. Your own
Nick.
parents, the octogenarians, understanding what might help them and our next generation.
You might
Sorry, Peter.
you might conclude that that applying your kind of the IT ethos that one could invent anything, the ultimate statement of agency, or perhaps of Silicon Valley, is to say we ought to workshop the future of life. And yet
Let's do that. Yeah.
In a moment when we've created tools of such power, in fact, it is bringing that workshop, that humanities, that artistic sensibility to these really powerful things that, it's an editorial act, but it's also a humanistic act.
Totally. Absolutely. And, and that circles back to transformative technology, right? This conference that we've been doing today. It's like, how can we, and Poppy Crum, because, her reason for living, I think, is, empathetic technology. How can we make our technology more empathetic? And, having lived through the digital revolution and seeing what happened when we, at the beginning, and Peter, you were there, we all fervently believed that whatever was good for the internet was good for humanity.
Right. When Steve Jobs told us, or me, when I showed up, we were going to change the world, changing the world was indistinguishable from doing good. It never occurred to us it would be otherwise.
That's right. That's right. And, Steve, a child of the 60s, right, would have had that. And, to come now 25, 30 years later and realize unchecked change, unbridled capitalism, could lead us to a place where we have suboptimal outcomes, like, collapse of democracy, or, we needed to keep the critics at bay at the time, because they were going to stop things from happening in the first place. And, you can't know where things are going when you're still discovering what they are, in the case of science, or what you can do with them in the case of engineering. And I still believe that. And I believe it even more strongly in the case for science, because yes, there will be negative effects. The goal is to restrict the negative impacts to the fewest number of people, to get those results as quickly as possible, and to use that information to prevent more people from getting hurt. But the idea that you could take a technology like CRISPR and put it back in the toothpaste tube is wishful thinking. It's nothing but wishful thinking, because the potential downsides are enormous, but the potential upsides are extraordinary. So,
well, and one of the things that really struck me, and I ended up getting a few copies of it, and I ended up sending one to Berlin. For a project I'm working on at BCG, because part of my role as a senior advisor at Boston Consulting Group, and they have a big new initiative called Deep Tech and the Deep Tech Mission, and it's all about atoms, bits, joules, and minds, and how that might help with large scale. It's for good, Deep Tech Mission for good. How that might help where we might need quantum computing and synthetic biology and nature co-design. And I ended up sending the book, and we assigned homework. Everyone had to read a section and then come up with a rose, thorn, and a bud, like kind of a rosy thing that they got out of it, a thorny issue that suddenly was like a, elephant in the room, and a bud, something nascent that might grow. And so everyone got back on the phone, and Massimo from Berlin, and Antoine from Paris, and Andrew Hessel, actually from here in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, who's a synthetic biologist. Each of us picked a section, and we ended up, a few of us picked Megan Palmer's, which was this fascinating thing that goes right to what you just said, which and beautiful imagery as well. What happens when everybody, or when anyone, can be a bioengineer? And it's about the ethics and the policy that they have seen with now 40,000 high school kids and undergraduates, as they're able to use an open wetware library to develop a new biobrick. And they have to maintain a wiki and actually talk about what the ethics and the policy are. And it's almost like a safe playground for them to start thinking about these things. And some of those kids who were in the iGEM competition have founded unicorn biotechnology startups today. So to me, that was a really a seminal piece of work that you've captured.
You're suggesting we're gluing together the science and the ethics.
Well, we have to. These are all asymmetric technologies, right? Any one person on the planet, any one citizen given access to these could do wonderful, amazing things. And there could be some dangers, and I think we have to really think about that. And it led us to reach out to Megan and invite her to be actually on our external science friction board for the BCG initiative. So I blame you completely, Jane.
We're having this conversation, right, even as we just kind of squeaked through an election where we kind of barely pulled off cybersecurity, where we realized that tools like Facebook and bots can really hijack our minds. In fact, this is much of what you and Poppy have just talked about. Are you more optimistic as we go through this biological century that we've learned, or that globally people will work together and be responsible, or is this kind of like rolling it as we go along?
I'm so glad you asked that question, and that was a really lovely framing for it. And first of all, Mickey, I just have to go back and honor you as a pioneer in design thinking, and how important that is, and how cool it is to have been at the absolute, forefront of that field.
I was just lucky to be there. Yeah, and it's amazing.
It's clearly more than that. But to your point, Peter, I think I am grateful that the digital revolution precedes the neobiological revolution, that we've been able to see what the results of this really rapid change are. And I think it's like a trial run, because I say that because I feel like the digital revolution transformed our externals. They transformed the way we do work. They transformed the way we communicate, the way we participate in government, the way our entertainment systems, communication systems, and so forth. This next version of, the digital revolution is internal. It's inside our brains, it's affecting our biological systems, and ultimately could lead to the speciation, of Homo sapiens, of humans. And so I am excited because we do have the lessons of the digital revolution to point to. And the fact that so many of the leaders of the digital revolution have recanted some of their initial perspectives and are actively working on ways to transform the impact of the technology on humans, I think is really encouraging. And
I think it's quite. I'm sorry, keep going, but you just reminded me of something that just happened that was at the intersection of digital and the biological revolution. But I want you to finish.
Let me finish my thought. I was going to say more specifically, the reason for my optimism is directly related to the pandemic. Without the pandemic, I wouldn't be nearly as bullish as I am right now. And the reason for that is, and Jason Kelly said this already. Jason is the CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks, and he said this when we did a Boston celebration of the book. So our first Kickstarter was in San Francisco, where so many of the people involved live, but we had so many people, contributors and so forth in Boston. So we did it, and it was my first virtual event because of the quarantine. But he was already saying it in April, that the collaboration that was taking place, the disregard for intellectual property, the open sharing of data, the rapidity of response, and the unprecedented level of collaboration was something that was just transformative for, I think, scientists and business people all over the world. And it gave us a sense of what we can do as a species, like as a community of humans, regardless of our corporate interests or national boundaries, could rise above those things to solve a problem that affects us all. And I don't know that there has ever been a rapid global collaboration of this magnitude. And coming as it does, on the heels of cyber attacks and privacy breaches and DOS attacks and all that sort of thing. It's like, okay, we saw that. We saw Silk Road. We saw the underbelly, of the digital revolution, and now we see both the potential and the risks. And so I feel like we're better positioned going forward.
We're really at a moment when people realize, kind of across the board, that it's a very plastic moment, right? That we have a decision. We could go into a more economically just world, or we could just kind of let consumption spin, right? As we were speaking, like if you heard a ding, an email came off, and it was an email from Tristan Harris. So Tristan was technology. I don't even
the vibe.
But so we've been having conversations, right? Because everything's gone on with Facebook and social capital. So I sent him a very positive article by Robert Putnam recently. The guy wrote Bowling Alone, who basically said America was a kind of a we republic, Tocquevillian, and then became much more selfish, but we could possibly become we again, a very positive view of the future. And yesterday in the Atlantic, Peter Turchin had a piece that basically said there are these laws that as elites grow and societies get bloated, they will devolve, right? And Tristan's like, what's your position on which way it is? And it sounds very much like this, which is it's a great moment of choice, right? This is the thing that's up for humanity is like, it's not predetermined. The ball's in our court, and how do we organize for it is a powerful
Absolutely true. So that actually leads me back to the big reveal about the taxonomy for the book.
Yes.
So we did the workshop, and we got Peter Schwartz to come in and do a scenario planning workshop for us. Yeah. And we looked at the things that could accelerate the biotech revolution and the things that could impede it or block it. And, the outcomes look very, very different. And so, I think that is exactly right. There are religious and cultural and political issues. There are technological issues. There are, of course, the science itself. And, we came up with all these really interesting examples. Like, for instance, if we are changing the future of our species using some kind of genetic engineering technologies, then in vitro fertilization and the rate of change of that technology would be one of the key things that you would look at. You would look at the rate of error correction in CRISPR technologies. There's a whole bunch of really specific things that you could look at. You could look at governments and political systems and say, like, what are the political ideologies that would be most beneficial to positive outcomes for the Neobiological Revolution? And what are ones that would throw up barriers to us? You could also look at it from a Nicholas Taleb point of view, like what's the black swan, that could completely transform the rate of change that we can expect. But it's a really interesting question. And I just, part of me wants to be alive, to see this change. And
you want to zoom ahead and see how the movie plays out in 50 years.
Right. And then decide whether I want to go to the movie or not.
Maybe go or not. So this brings me back to what I wanted to interject in there, but I'm actually glad I didn't, because then you elaborated a lot on kind of how Peter Schwartz helped you with sort of scenario planning. He's sort of a master at that. And then Peter, you mentioned Tristan. And that was the thing I wanted to mention, which was I just attended the Synthetic Bio Beta Conference that John Cumbers puts on once a year. That's just sort of a global, amazing conference. And his keynote the first day was Tristan Harris. And the reason was the Social Dilemma movie is a wake-up call. And it goes right back to what you just said, Jane. We've seen the underbelly. You said, I'm grateful the digital revolution preceded the biological revolution, because at least we've been able to see Silk Road. We've been able to see that a social media platform could strip mine cognition and give it back so that only despots win in certain situations around the world. We better do that now, before the biological century, before you can have designer kids, or all of us decide which kind of wings we'll have tomorrow. Which brings me back to like maybe another one of my favorites in the book. Danny Hillis said six things to think about when designing your child. And his article is just a delightful bit of science fiction, or not, about where we might go. And I do think that's what, so you kind of had the workshops, you had the scenario plans, what could block it, what could do it, what could accelerate it. And then this all kind of came together as not only a book, but it seems like an ongoing community and conversation.
So,
Where's it going now, and what are you excited about kind of at this moment?
So just to conclude, because it actually did result in something, we decided, so Hanu Rajanimi actually hosted this at his house with his magnificent and beautiful neuroscientist, venture capitalist wife, Susanna. But we turned to Hanu. So what will the outcome of this scenario planning workshop be? And we said, Hanu, and this is where I brought in my my Wired bias. When we launched Wired magazine in 1993, we were surrounded by the cyberpunk environment and reality. And, I was hugely influenced, as was Lewis, by William Gibson's Neuromancer and Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. And, those are obviously very dystopian environments. And we were really missing a positive vision of the future at that point. And we consciously set out with Wired to create positive visions of the future, because what you visualize becomes what you build.
Yeah,
right.
It's the Star Trek thesis. Yeah,
exactly. And the kids, growing up during the dawn of the space age, were given all sorts of visions of the future that they are now building. Elon Musk is building the stuff he saw as an 8-year-old, and the stuff he imagined. And so anyway, I asked Hanu if he would write up fiction based on these scenarios. And he did, and it's in the book, and it's called Vanilla Memories. And, we published it before the book came out as a kind of teaser for the book. And it's really beautifully written, and it's based, deeply embedded in the science. But it's kind of interesting, because the minute I published on the newsletter, which links to the story, and the first email I got back was from a woman who said, "If this is our neobiological future, count me out." She really did not want to participate. She was so horrified by how strange and how alien it could be. And, Hanu's piece wasn't the far, far, far future. It was a conceivable future. So I forgot what question you asked.
It would be interesting. You talk about we who would say dawn of the space age, right? Because that was a very positive moment there. It'd be really interesting to go back and ask people, the Wired of that era, what they saw coming in this biological century. It'd be a really great trip to take. Actually, we can take it. Because
can we ask somebody from the 1960s what this biological century is supposed to look like?
And if we did,
let's get a guess.
We'd have to ask Walter Cronkite, the most
we haven't hit him on the show yet.
Of the man who took us through the space age, and who in 1967 had a series on CBS called The 21st Century. And there were several. There was Living in Space, Living in the Deep, but there were 2 episodes. One, Can We Live to Be 100 in the 21st Century? And the other was The Mystery of Life, delving into DNA, and what if we could artificially construct things? So I thought we might go back to this month in 1967.
I see Walter is in the green room. Let's bring him in.
Yes, here's Walter Cronkite.
What is life? How is it formed? Is it God-given and sacred? What if man could remake man in any image he chose? Would he choose wisely, or would he choose Huxley's Brave New World? These are profound questions for today, because in the 21st century, man may have the most awesome power in history to design human life itself. You are hearing the heartbeat of a 9-week-old fetus in an artificial womb in the laboratory of Dr. Robert Goodlin at the Stanford Medical Center. Fetuses have been kept alive here following miscarriages for 24 hours. Someday it may be possible to save fetuses aborted at almost any stage of pregnancy and carry them through to birth. The aim here, which is being pursued on many fronts, is to study that deepest of all human mysteries, the mystery of life. Today, in the second half of the 20th century, at some of our foremost research institutes and universities, the great intellectual thrust in science is in molecular biology, probing into the very core and essence of life. Some of our finest minds are engaged in it. It has been said that when the history of science in this century is written, the first half will have been the study of things, the automobile, airplane, rocket. The second half will be the study of living things, the cell, the chromosome, the gene. The results will be critical to us all in the 21st century.
Okay. How about that?
Molecular biology. I'm going to say it like that from
Yes.
now on. That was brilliant, Peter. Excellent.
When Mickey and I, well, as you know, we all agreed you were going to be on. We figured the show out yesterday night, and
Well, we
so
all hoped you'd be on. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
but it was great. We were so thrilled. And around 3:00 today, Mickey's like, "Who will our dead guest be?" And
we've had presidents. We've had Marshall McLuhan a few times, and his grandson live. His grandson is still alive, so he's been on. But yeah, I think Walter was pretty perfect. I liked his comment about, and we haven't talked much about Huxley's Brave New World. You know, I think you hear a lot about 1984, but there was that other book that was probably just top of mind back in the 60s, The Brave New World. Mm-hmm. And I just, yeah, it's nice.
I reread it.
Oh, have you? I haven't. Yeah.
I wanted to use that phrase. I wanted to say it's a brave new world with a happy smiley face.
Yeah.
And I thank God I reread the book, because I could never, ever want to associate anything from that book with what we have going, you know? And I think, you know, the 60s hadn't really happened yet. You know, that was the beginning of the 60s. We really hadn't torn down the monolithic structures in our society yet. And we hadn't opened ourselves up to empathy. You know, we were very much, you know, my perspective is that we were very much laboring under all of these expectations and all this judgment and all these inevitable, you know, evolutions of things where life is grim and you have to buckle down and, you know, suck it up. And, you know, I think I look at my children today and they're like, why would I do that? That sounds hard, you know, you know, and then they go off and do something incredibly hard, but because they're interested in it, like it, not because someone said, you have to do that because I said so. So, yeah.
I'm curious, Jane, what surprised you and as you were pulling the book together, and you know, what story maybe you know, pushed you in left field or kind of got you to really think about something that maybe, you know, just surprised you in some way?
I have to say, and it's not just because I just put this particular story online yesterday, but it's on my mind. And it taps into everything that we've been talking about today. Juan Enrique wrote an essay, and Juan actually hosted one of those dinners for me when I was in Boston in the fall of 2018. And I asked him to write an essay for us, and he chose the topic of diversity. And, you know, I know as a chocolate producer that, you know, if you grow cacao in a monoculture way, it's extremely vulnerable to, you know, the thing that will you know, that you haven't planned for, didn't know about, that's going to totally decimate your crop, because that's the only thing you've got going there. Whereas if you grow in a polyculture environment, you're more protected because the crop is exposed to more different things and becomes hardier. I know as a publisher that, you know, diversity and points of view give you a broader perspective or experience or backgrounds or whatever, give you a broader perspective. And, as a student of biology, I realized that, diversity is what leads to robustness, and that a diverse ecosystem is a robust ecosystem. And so Juan starts from that point of view and says, so why is it that there's only one species of hominid? And it's a really interesting question. He says there's 15,000 species of birds. We basically coexisted with a couple of species and even managed to reproduce with them, which I think actually is not the definition of a species, but never mind. So we basically clobbered them all to death, and it's been just Homo sapiens ever since. And we now have the ability to either deliberately or inadvertently alter our species in a way that could lead to the creation of a different species. We could deliberately do it in order to engineer spacefaring humans, or we could frivolously do it in order to have, tails or wings or extra appendages of some sort. But what will we do when that happens? The amount of DNA that separates, us from the apes is less than 1%. And so the amount that separates me with my, completely white, European genes from, a Bushman in the Kalahari is remarkably tiny. And so, and yet we still can't get along, right? I mean, I'm from Kentucky, where, the police brutality and the racism was on full display this summer in a truly disheartening way. And we've seen it all around the planet. It's like, how come we're still afraid of each other and can't get along? So Juan's essay, talking about that, I think is the one that's touched me the most deeply. And I say that too, because he just published a book, and it's called Right, Wrong, How Technologies Change Ethics. And it's just out this month from MIT.
It's called, what's the name of it again?
Right, Wrong.
Right, Wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's pretty prolific here, but he was with Craig Ventnor, in that first human genome era. So he knows his stuff. And
he coined the phrase bioeconomy like 25 years ago. He started a life sciences study center, research center, something at Harvard in the business school, a very long time ago. So yeah.
Well, I remember we had a dinner with Fast Company at some point, and Juan came to it when we were exploring kind of design in Boston and the future of biology.
To your consciousness.
Oops, Peter, it sounds like you're playing
You're
some
probably
audio
wondering
back there.
what that is.
Yeah.
Let me just give an update. A very interesting thing's about to happen. In about 7 minutes, we're going to join the live stream of the Transformational Technology Conference. Yeah. And so I have to go off and do a little piece of engineering, because we have to open up 2 StreamYard sessions and figure some stuff out. So I am going to take myself off of this. You guys are going to continue. And Mick, you have a link. And Jane, you can also log out and log back in. And then at the top of the hour, we will magically be switched from this conversation. So you just continue this conversation. At the top of the hour, the show will go over to Nicole and me. And then you guys can relog into the new thing that we're sending you. And we'll continue with the Global Transformational Technology Conference. Jane, I will see you back in a different virtual world, in the same world we're designing, in a very few minutes.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Perfect. See you in a bit, Peter. And we'll see how this goes. I will, just in our little private chat here, I'll paste the StreamYard link for the one that Peter sent me. To join if you'd like to stay on. And also, we want you to know that this has been a long day, and I know you've already been speaking at 2 conferences. So anytime you need to bail, please bail. It's a Friday evening.
Awesome.
And when we transition, the comment I was making about Juan, we were at this dinner and it was a bio kind of thing, and he said, you can go to a street corner in Cambridge, not far from here, and almost every day find a bio startup that'll be as big as Google in 20 years. And he said that maybe 10 years ago, and he's not
Really?
probably even, he's not off. He was right on track.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really true now. And it's funny because, I have a lot of really good, dear, amazing friends who are all based in Boston. And, when I go there, I have to admit how refreshing it is to spend almost no time talking about business models and all the time talking about, science and possibilities. And, I had this conversation with Joey Ito, who's been very involved in this field for a long time. And he's like, he was being kind of funny. He's like, oh, what do you have out there? You've got, digital health, but everything else is happening here in Boston. And I remember Chrissy Farr, who's a journalist for CNBC, covering health on a national level, once put out a tweet saying, if you're starting a new biotech company, where would you start it? San Francisco or Boston? Because this has become like a trope amongst those of us who go back and forth between the two cities. And the answers were like Austin, Denver, Chicago, Phoenix. And that's a really interesting thing.
Well, I'd like to see that kind of, you were talking about diversity. And, a number of studies when I work with the BCG folks are around cognitive diversity and how do you actually outperform in business? You outperform through cognitive diversity. Indra Nooyi, when she was running Pepsi, 73 out of 75 quarters, she increased shareholder value and increased senior female leadership and diversity over the course of her career with multiple challenges, but also got to the point where Doritos or Frito-Lays, and it's not like we want to necessarily celebrate snacks too much, but a Frito-Lay's potato chip by the time she left, because she invested in science as well. She's no longer, the CEO there, but when she stepped down and retired, a Frito-Lay's potato chip is made of 3 ingredients: potatoes, oil, and salt. Today. So she actually removed a lot of those things by actually investing in biological science, agritech, and things like that. And so I do think organizations are starting to figure this out, and there has been that need. But I actually like what you said at the very beginning of this, which just you weren't sure if you were going to become a scientist, but you were never going to stop being a science groupie. And I love that, because we could use a dose of just celebrating the science and the scientists and the artists, and I think that's what I see you doing every day, and what you're having this community. What are you doing next? What's like in the last minute or two before we turn into pumpkins? And I'm gonna fiddle around to try to find the link for the next link we have to join. Peter put it in here. Yep. Okay. What's next? What are you excited about as you look into 2021?
Well, I'm starting a podcast. Funny you should mention it.
All right.
Yes. And, I have a lot of ambitions for the podcast. I'm starting in a rather traditional format. And I'm going to interview some of the people from the book because we never really had a chance to do that. And then I am very interested in live events. I think there's an enormous magic that happens when you bring people together across these wormholes that they are in. And I also want to make this world more visible to a broader public. So I don't want to just talk to, the tech and science elite. I want to make this world, something that you can see and touch and smell and taste, so that people get a sense of what the future has in store. Because honestly, we need to be making these decisions about how we deploy this technology. And I don't think it should be left solely in the hands of the scientists. And I think the scientists themselves don't want that responsibility.
Well, this goes back even to your comment about why don't you start up the company in Austin or in Boulder or in Pittsburgh or in whatever. That gives us that cognitive diversity that we probably need if we can get more people thinking about this. I just was speaking with some Japanese deep tech investors in Tokyo, and they have 40 or 50 startups in Japan focused on societal needs around how do we feed, how do we cope with environmental challenges in the planet. Well, so very exciting. I think we have to shift to the other one. It's now hit 5 o'clock. If you want to join, click on that StreamYard link, and I think we're going to get switched over there.
Okay. And let me
Um,
just say that this is a global conversation. That
It
the
has to be.
Austin, Pittsburgh, and
It has to be.
Boulder is not nearly enough
Yes.
diversity.
It's not at all. No, it's not. Yeah. All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
That was so fun.
That was great.
Okay, let's see what happens. Maybe we'll be put into the other studio, I think.
I am there, so, and my mic is
Oops.
working, so I'm going to click out of this.
This is that I kind of set it up at the beginning where, I wanted to answer, or the curation for this really came out of me asking myself the question, what would it take for this period of time, this sort of like devastating, as Jason Maiden said, it's like, it's for the first time in human history, we have such a collective trauma that we can all see and know about. Like previous pandemics, people in other parts of the world might not have known about it. It wasn't happening simultaneously, but it's actually happening completely simultaneously, and we all sort of know about it. And so, in the shadow of that, I was like, what would it take for that? What would it take for that shared experience to actually be the beginning of decades of abundance and health and human happiness? And that's where, these 12 areas came out that the talks roughly fit within. And so what I wanted from today and tomorrow is for people to get a sense of how much possibility there was, how many vectors, unexplored, unconsidered vectors, where we actually have a great deal of power and ability to create the things that we really need. And so I'm thrilled. It's like, every talk is I think pushing into that. And we have Mickey and Jane ready to come on.
Hey, Nicole, I have another question for you. Today's show, well, hey guys, welcome.
Hi.
We have accomplished a feat by connecting two different shows together, and thanks for reviewing the technology. I was going to ask you this. So you, of course, put this show together during the pandemic, and what went on today reflected a lot of research and updated thinking that people were developing over the last several months. And I'm wondering, and you've, of course, been putting on this transformational tech conference for a few years. How has the vector of what...
This is the 6th year.
Huh? 6.
This is the 6th year.
Here's my question. How has the universe been, or how have you seen the nature of what people are working on get changed, moved, motivated by this shared experience that we've been through for the last 9 months?
Yeah, Dr. Ghaffari said it earlier today. Like, one of the things was, in the very beginning, when I first started this, and Jeffrey Martin is my co-founder with Transformative Tech. When we first started, there was a lot of single signal. There was a lot of single signal where there was just like one signal. Now, pretty much everyone is doing multi-signal, or if they're doing single signal, then there is a contextual program that they're also picking up, like something, it's integrated into a coaching program. I would say, there was a period of time where we were all really focused on measurement, and now, everyone is, focused on like, what are the interventions now that we know that we can measure it? So you're seeing multi-signal, you're seeing humans in the loop. We're seeing, that acceleration of machine learning. There are, some tough, hairy problems that have to get solved that I think will sort of unlock, a compounding of progress. And so those are things like, the reason why I love the Epicor Biosystems is like the lab on a patch. At the very beginning of, ultimately starting to measure things like cortisol eventually. It's like, and having millions of data points out there versus, just a few, and them all being, things that, that are cordoned off. So we're going to see, we'll see the proliferations of data that allows for more insight. So a big breakthrough is, something like that, getting lab test, on a sticker. Another thing are things like, Mary Lou Jepson's work and also Brian Johnson's work of, basically getting past the logjam of fMRI machines and how that is actually slowing medical and psychological understanding and progress, because they're very expensive. There's not that many of them, and everybody has to wait their turn. And so, that sort of thing. Also, another thing is, having more federated machine learning. And so that was one of the things that Moxie is doing. And, there's several other places where the critical personal private data doesn't actually leave the collection point that the person owns, with them being, as Mike Edelhart said today, the point of collection, but the math leaves, and just the math.
So one of the points
algorithms.
One of the points that Jane made a moment ago is that the pandemic has created a global set of a moment of collaboration and a kind of global eyes on things and working together, which seems like an extraordinary moment for science. And Jane, I'd love you to just amplify that, because it's both a hopeful thing, but it suggests a way that we're all working a problem very differently.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody saw this as a threat to the entire world, and people came together across interests, right? Across national boundaries, across corporate boundaries. There's this extraordinary sharing of data that, normally a scientist is all about the data that she collects and the information that she can, derive from that. And that's what her funding depends on. And so to see people just willingly sharing their data in the interests of something bigger than, their own careers, or sharing their data, of course, could advance their careers, but perhaps not in the same way that has happened in the past. So, the sharing of data, the sharing of IP, I think we've reached a point of maximum, human collaboration. I don't know that there's ever been a time when we have collaborated so openly and honestly and quickly, in the interests of something that's bigger than any of our individual lives, or companies or institutions or governments. And I'm enormously heartened by that. I'm very excited. I think it bodes well for the future of our Neobiological Revolution.
One of the
Jane, I wanted to catch everyone up just before we jumped over to this stream, in the Quarantine stream. Jane, you were talking about just sort of, this has to be a global movement. We have to get a lot more people to understand this, because it shouldn't be that it's like all the cool biological startups are Boston or San Francisco. It should be Austin and Pittsburgh and Texas and Tokyo and Abu Dhabi and Mumbai. And, it should be really, let's get all brains on deck for this, because it really has to do with the future of humanity. I'm curious what you think is going to help us get there, Jane, on your side. And then Nicole, what's the arc been in terms of when you first started 6 years ago to now, in terms of global, like the people you're pulling in, the conversations you're having? How has that changed over 6 years?
Okay, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is that, scientists coming together to try and hammer out the proper way of pursuing the research has been so eye-opening. I mean, we saw at the second international conference on human genome editing, we saw He Jiankui come out with this extraordinary announcement that he had, human engineered these two babies, and using CRISPR. And the world's reaction could have been, maybe it was a trial balloon. Let's see what the world will say about this. And I think we saw the responses. And I think what we have seen when those conversations take place among an international community of scientists is that, these responses are very cultural. They're very pegged to a particular culture and a particular geography and a particular time. And we saw this when American scientists were talking about, just because a baby has a risk of being born deaf doesn't mean that we would automatically assume or agree that genetically engineering that embryo would be an acceptable choice. And in fact, a scientist was explaining to an international audience that, deaf parents would welcome another deaf child into their community. And of course, we all know they have this incredible, rich and beautiful way of communicating with each other, which is sign language. I think the Chinese scientists were appalled. To them, a deaf embryo is a non-viable fetus. And so I think it's really important that these conversations be taking place now, because the first and most important thing we can do is understand what those differences are and how they differ from India to China to Tanzania to, Colombia. And I think the global community of biomakers, people that are running like your bioeducational maker lab, is very global, and they are literally in there's like 3 or 4 in Amsterdam, but they're in Shenzhen and they're in Timbuktu. I mean, they are not dependent on big government, big hospital, or big academic institutions. The stuff is available in scientific publications and YouTube videos. So I think we're going to see a really interesting time over the course of the next 5 years as we come to grips with how each of these communities is going to respond differently to these tools and these possibilities.
This kind of reminds me of what Nicole, earlier today you had Gallup, and they were talking about how a ladder, 0, you're not feeling well-being, 10, you're feeling a lot of well-being, for their global polls on happiness and well-being, wasn't actually culturally appropriate in some places. Like, what does it mean if I'm at the top of the ladder? Does that mean I'd fall off? What is it? What about just my community? And so the new one that they were talking about today was about kind of introducing new measures that have to do with more cultural relevance about community and knitting things together, and not assuming even just a ladder is culturally the same everywhere in the world. And I just love that. Nicole, what have you seen in the evolution of sort of the globalization of your efforts and more, cognitive diversity and cultural diversity?
Well, a couple of things. One of the things that's unique about this, about transformative tech is the premise that healing, skilling, and expansion are actually all the same thing, that they belong in the same community. So it seems very broad because it's across those 3 vectors of mental and emotional well-being, social and emotional wellness, and human purpose and performance. But it actually is very narrow in the fact that it's really all about the, human psychology, the hardware and the software, the brain and the mind and the body connected, using, and then leveraging these exponential technologies. So it's the kind of definition that crafts a big tent with a very, precise focus, and allows for a lot of collaboration, because, people who are actively working on depression, they aren't quote unquote competing with someone who's doing human performance, though they, can certainly collaborate and share much of the same information. So by definition, the way that we've set it up is a big tent. And then globally is, I have a global orientation, from having lived in China and, traveled a lot on my own. So, this global orientation, my belief was that, if it's not for all of us, then, it's not like that's not okay, and also the reality, the realistic numbers are, that, even if everybody in, 1 or 2 countries, achieve, whatever the top of the ladder, if the rest of the world, and especially some of the places with the really big numbers like India, Africa, and China, if the rest of the world also isn't experiencing a high level of well-being, then it doesn't actually matter. The outcomes don't really shift globally. And so it is by definition, it's a problem that demands a global orientation. It's a definition that is suitable for a global orientation. And from a humanities standpoint, it is something that is sort of a universal, I believe, right.
I think another interesting point here is that the pandemic and the collaboration, Jane, that you speak of has created a clear global well-being crisis, right? We are clearly aware of the mental health issues. We're also aware of when you push us to really use our virtual technologies, our Zoom and stuff like that, we see a fraying, and we become fascinated with how we can change those technologies to drive flourishing. When you and I first started talking about your conference maybe 2 years ago, I kept trying to figure out, like, what category does this fit in? And, what is it? Where is it, right? Well, if there was any question about where technology flourishing, mental health, learning, capacity, fit. This pandemic moment has helped frame that, and I think we saw a lot of that. We saw a lot of that today.
Well, I want to. So now I get to ask you and Mickey questions.
Yeah.
So usually, when you guys have come to my conference before, you haven't really had a chance to sort of like really see the whole thing. This is kind of one of the fun things about this at a distance kind of world, is like you actually got to see so much. And so as given the way that you both synthesize so much, I'm really curious, what did you see today?
I am just going to interject here and say, I can't wait to continue following this conversation, but I'm going to let you guys continue from here.
Take
So
care.
lovely to see all
Thanks,
of you.
Jane.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, I would say, Nicole, I'm going to point out that today I haven't actually been able to be completely tuned in. I was tuning in and then jumping off and tuning in and then jumping off. Friday was it's a tough work day for me. But the Gallup one I thought was pretty fascinating, and the other person that was teamed up with Gallup that was talking about these new metrics, and this notion that I didn't even have any idea that Daniel Kahneman had been involved, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel-winning behavioral scientist. I didn't realize he was involved in the original shaping of this global survey and global collection of surveys that were done over a number of years. And I just loved the nuance of saying, okay, yes, we didn't have anything like Gallup in certain countries. Now we do. Now we actually have to be culturally sensitive. I thought that was important. The other thing that I really appreciated was Jane just left, but Jane and Poppy Crumb were talking about how much we are being affected by this weird moment, and whether we know it or not, and how much our children are being affected, our kids are being affected by this. So I love that session because it started getting into kind of the neuroplasticity and the neuroscience of some of this stuff, because of Poppy's background, but just that exploration of turn off the video, maybe just listen, try out different platforms like the alternative VR platforms or other platforms, just to get a sense of the different ways. Alt space VR, I think, is what Poppy mentioned. And also understand how much our brains and maybe our 5-year-old kids are being shaped by this in maybe positive ways as well. They're figuring out things sooner than some of the teachers are. So to me, that was really inspiring, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow because I get to take a break and actually just tune in on it all day and not feel that there's a weird pressure when you're actually presenting or hosting, and I don't have any of that pressure this year, which I'm pretty happy about. So I'm just excited to visit.
Mick, at the end of the conversation between Jane and Poppy, Poppy made a very interesting comment about almost the speed at which we're evolving using these technologies, and almost the hopefulness that young people are using to figure them out, almost like they're the lighthouse from which we can learn. So as I was watching today, I made a couple of clips. So let's see if we can take a look at that right now. Omid, let's see if this works.
I mean, from a neuroplasticity perspective, we are going to be different humans when we come out of this. I think that's no question. Whether it's us, whether it's I have a 5-year-old. I listen to their Zoom calls, and it's often the adults that have difficulty. Adult is stressed. Adult drops off the teacher in some cases, and it's a bunch of 5-year-olds who are our next leaders going, okay, we've lost them. What do we need to do? Can we help him? Can we bring him back? Well, I think screen's frozen. Let's try. And they're busy doing this, and as that might seem scary to some people, like, oh no, screens. But these minds are engaged in amazing ways and dealing with the situation. And we are different humans every time we engage with new technology. As long as we approach it from, this is what's happening. We are empowered, and we are thinking through the things that we're going to want to recover, and also the things that have happened because of this type of virtual and digital environment that we're living in with regard to it's an opportunity.
Yeah, that just struck me as an interesting place to turn and to learn. And also Poppy was bringing up some of the downsides of all of this, but then the positive side is there's a new generation that is teaching us this stuff.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the text that you sent to me where you were like, it's simultaneously, it might be the most optimistic. Can you talk about that? Because I think in this spirit of the times, it's really relevant.
Yeah, that's right. We are, look, we're in a global crisis, and we have many global crises, right? So we've gone through an election thing, we've got the virus coming back, and at a time when people really just don't want to deal with that, plus whatever all the economic issues are going into that. And yet, here is a community that is doggedly forging and taking new territory, inventing the future, figuring out how we might program ourselves better, how we might design the future we want to invent. And it's something between jarring but kind of a statement of where we're at, that we have this power, we have these problems going on, and in a broader sense, and Mick, you brought this up on our show a moment ago, this is a design moment. These are intentional decisions we can make about how we design ourselves and design our future. And the other thing I'm struck by is, the national conversation has been somewhat of a downer. We've all been hurling stuff at each other. And just under the surface is this amazing work that is, so powerful. How do we program cities to become more flourishing? How is it that our vehicles can take care of us? All the conversations that we're having here, but we use the technology correctly, are very hopeful, right? And so, part of this is, how do we spread that and enroll more people in it? And, you were even talking today about the fact that our most pervasive technologies, like gaming technology, that we often don't even think of as media, can be very powerful for this. So we're almost at we're at a moment where what you've been shepherding for 6 years has to break into the mainstream, because it's kind of what's next.
Yeah, and I think, I loved some of that stuff today, and the hope I get every time. Last year when I went to Transformational Tech, one of the days over the weekend, I didn't have to actually present or anything, and I just loved just wandering around and meeting people and stumbling into the breakouts. And I noticed tomorrow you've got Patty Mays from MIT. I'm super excited about that. I'm also excited about Agnes Tibbe because of the broader ideas of sort of larger community and things like that, and a bunch of other people. So I'm kind of curious, Nicole, what are you most excited about tomorrow? Because this continues, and if you're tuning in from Quarantine, you should look up Transformational Tech, and we can put up a link to it. But you really want to check out day 2 if you can, and sign up to the event if you can, because it's a pretty glorious and fascinating place. So what are you excited about for tomorrow, Nicole?
Well, starting out tomorrow, Jeffrey is going to do sort of like an overview of, what progress we've made psychologically. I do day 1, and I do the business part, and then Jeffrey comes on day 2, and he does more research. And so tomorrow is going to be, it's going to have some, really interesting research. And so there's, psychological advances over the year. There's Iris AI with a complement to researchers. There's Patty Mays, as you mentioned, who at MIT, whose lab, if you look at some of the top stories that have come out of MIT for really interesting things like subvocal communication and a bunch of other things, so many of them have come from people students who are in one of Patty Mays's labs. And so she's really sort of like, the Kevin Bacon of awesome.
Totally.
I'm really looking forward to that. And she does she's going to talk about dreams and augmented cognition and several things. I'm super excited about Giseline and Sly Lee talking about digital intimacy and distance, because we're going to be in these remote worlds for a while, but also as we start to think about the digital worlds and some other things like that, you know, the problem of being connected at a distance, you know, because there's some part of our lives that's always going to have a bit of distance to it. You know, that is something that needs to be solved. And so I'm excited about that one. I'm deeply excited about hearing Anil Seth and Stephen Kotler settle in. That's actually, that talk is actually an hour. And we don't think it's nearly long enough. like it's the one like super long one so they can like dig. And these two people have not been on video talking to each other and really geeking out with one another the way that you've seen the diamonism in all of the talks that we've had today. Like that intimate diamonism that you've seen all day, you're going to see with Anil and Stephen tomorrow. And then one of the ones that's really important that I mentioned several times is really Dr. Eust and Amanda Polstanek, and talking about you know, the technocratic oath and sort of like how do we navigate to get these things right? Because, you know, it's like if we don't get the data privacy, ethics, and sovereignty right, we don't get the upside. You know, we have to make it so people have the upside of AI without the downside of the loss of privacy. And we have to get it right, one, so that it's safe and fair and, you know, all of those other things, but we also have to get it right so that people really use it, so that people really lean into it, because this is the sort of, you know, thing that could, you know, unlock entirely different levels of what's possible for humans to do. And so I spent a lot of time in conversations around trust and security and, you know, homomorphic data and federated data and a bunch of other things. And so I'm really excited about this talk because, you know, to the extent that every time I can bring more things to the community to reflect and consider upon, you know, as we move forward, because one of the things that you have to know is that the people in transformative tech and wellbeing tech, they're building right now. Like this is not tomorrow. This isn't theoretical. They're building things right now. And so things are out of labs and getting built right now. And so, you know, we need guidance around that, and we need to be able to do it the right way. So I'm excited about that because I think I'm really inspired by Dr. Eust's 5 neural rights. I think directionally and intentionally, it's really good. One of the other things is I love, one of the reasons why you see at a conference like this such a focus on enterprise is because there's a lot of people at companies. So, you know, my reason for being interested in cities, companies, educational institutions, corporates, is that, you know, in the goal of, you know, our goal for transformative tech and helping 1 billion people get to fundamental well-being, the way that you do that, like no one organization can do that. The way that you do that is by, you know, supporting places that have large numbers of people. And that's actually what had me start, you know, that was the origin of my interest in cities. It's like, there's a lot of people in cities and most of the world's going to live in cities. And so if we're going to use a platform, cities are a good one. And so the same thing goes for enterprise. So Mark Donovan and Luis Gallardo, who are going to be speaking tomorrow afternoon, are going to be talking about empathy and enterprise and actually using enterprise in this way. And so I'm excited about that. And then 2 ones. So one, there's 2 jaw-dropping ones at the end. And I love to save I love to have a good jaw dropper where people are like, I can't believe it. I can't believe people could do that. I didn't know that was possible. And so one of our jaw droppers tomorrow is let me put it this way. Basically, it turns out that we are happy when other people, we believe that it turns out that we're happy when we feel that we're happy when we make other people happy, actually. So someone said that earlier today. We're happiest when we're making other people happy. So Jeremiah Ouyang did a survey where they found out that caregivers were actually happier, even though they had more to do during this time period than non-caregivers. And they were more productive caregivers, and so what you're going to see tomorrow is basically the speaker will start with an overview that has over 10 million data points that shows that we are in fact happier when the people around us are happier, and it's all picked up off of an accelerometer. It's like,
oh my gosh,
it's amazing. It's like when I understood, like I was talking to him and I was like, I was like, wait a second, tell me, like, are you saying that you can see this, this, and this? And he was like, yeah. So that's really amazing. That's Dr. Kazuo Yano. He's a Hitachi fellow. He has over 250 patents. And he's going to go through what he's been working on around happiness in large organizations, which is really just, he also is using large organizations because there's a lot of people there. And so it's a good place to do that. And it's just accelerometer data. That's it. Nothing more. And then I'm also really excited about, one of the last talks tomorrow is really about AI and storytelling. And so earlier today, people might have heard several of the people mentioned, we talked about the stories. Dr. Litvin mentioned, the stories that we tell ourselves. And then in another talk, we were talking about storytelling. We were talking about what is a game and what is storytelling. And so, I really believe that storytelling is one of the ways that not only do we tell ourselves who we are, but we tell ourselves who we might want to be. And the role of, enhancing and enabling people to tell their own stories, to explore stories, to share stories, to learn stories, to grow through stories. Actually, Paolo with Moxie talked about this. And so one of the last talks tomorrow is AI shamans, from digital twins to digital witnesses, how storytelling tech will change human growth and development. And with that, we have Bernie Sue, who is a 3-time Emmy-winning interactive storyteller. They've just been doing amazing things on Twitch with Story About an AI. And then Greg Cross, who's the co-founder and chief business officer of Soul Machines. And, one of the things that, for anyone who's might have heard about Soul Machines, one of the things that they have said, which is probably one of the headline worthy things, is that he says, you don't train AI, you raise it. And so that conversation about like how we tie storytelling, and AI-enabled storytelling and facilitate it in our own ability to tell stories, and then also our ability to learn through stories. So I'm really excited about that one. And there's even more. It's just like, this is like
Nicole, I'm wondering if I'll even go to sleep tonight. I'm just like thinking about this. But it's interesting. You mentioned a few different things in there. Story, and I remember when we joined a past quarantine episode, you said humans change when they can change the story they tell about themselves.
Yeah.
And that is a way that we change ourselves, is we actually think of ourselves as a different. We fix maybe something broken in us, and actually or understand that broken part is part of a better story that we tell ourselves. So I'm super excited about that one. And you mentioned just impact at enterprise scale, and that reminded me of Jeremiah's conversation today with the organization in Europe, IQ, I think it was, doing some games and playful games, and this notion of when we're caregivers, when we help others, we are happier. And I'm super excited about kind of the thread that goes from today to tomorrow, with that seed, and now you're going to kind of pay it off tomorrow. I noticed too that you're actually going to have a musical performance, if not a few, I don't know, but I noticed that you had Lucinda Bell listed there. Is she going to be performing tomorrow? She's a amazing friend, and I've seen her talk a little bit about her own evolution as an artist by having to think about the strings of her harp as effectively hip hop, and getting into sort of more Beats by Dre music when she was young, because she couldn't drag her harp around. So tell us a little bit about why would you have music? Why do you have that kind of stuff happening at your conference?
Yeah, I mean, at our live event, we have meditation, we have music, we have lots of, a lot of transformative tech is on the skin. And so people get to feel it. It's very experiential, and experiential is a big, part of how we, I think it's a big vector for treatment and a variety of other things. And so, so music is just one of the pieces. And there's actually been some interesting studies. I don't think Susan talked about it. But one of the things that they see with neuroaesthetics, because they look at all of the arts, is the, music affecting the brain in the same way as psilocybin. And so it's like music absolutely is a vector for treatment for lots of things. I think we sort of understand it intuitively, but we don't necessarily, use it actively. And that's one of the exciting things about neuroaesthetics. Again, it's like, this is where, Dr. Ghani's work ties in with the, lab on a sticker. It's like when we start to have these proliferations of sensors, so we can actually know what's going on, then you would have the ability to say, well, like right now, I need Lucinda Bell. I mean, I know I need her anyway because she's my neighbor and her music's amazing. But
she's been putting on these outdoor backyard concerts where she just goes out, and you're right there, so you get to hear them. I'm excited about that, because if you have never heard Lucinda Bell,
you're in for a treat.
She makes a harp do weird things, which is great, and her voice she's a siren, so that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Nicole, this is pretty exciting, and
exciting. I am going to have to go because I have to welcome everybody to the after party.
I think we're good. We're
after party.
It's on Wonder. It's in the link at the bottom of the schedule. Just click that link and you'll go to you'll be transported to the after party. just because we're not, just because we're digital doesn't mean we're doing the after party. We're doing the after party. So
some delivery person just showed up with a wine from somewhere in cyberspace. So I'm assuming that's part of the after party. I didn't have this a minute ago.
Sharing and making all of us dig into this moment of accelerationism, where this whole field that you picked up the weak signal of and have been amplifying is now kind of center stage and needed. And my only concern is the next 3 days could be a 1,000-page book. And so now we must have technology help us digest, understand, and live all this stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Let's get close, but not so close.